Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are, everyone. So, welcome to this webinar on strengthening nutrition for growth commitments for food fortification in Africa. My name is Saskia Ozendarp, and I'm the Executive Director of the Micronutrient Forum, and I'm honored to moderate today's discussion. The Micronutrient Forum is co-hosting this webinar in collaboration with our partners from the Food Fortification Initiative, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition or GAIN, Helen Keller International, the Iodine Global Network, Nutrition International, TechnoServe and Millers for Nutrition, UNICEF, and the World Food Programme. So I would like to extend a special thank you to our partners and our co-hosts for their support in preparations for this webinar. So why are we here? Well, a month from now, at the end of March 2025, the Nutrition for Growth Summit will be held in Paris, which is an important opportunity for governments, for donors, for businesses, and for civil society to commit to transformative actions that accelerate progress on malnutrition. And today's discussion will focus on large-scale food fortification, which is one of the tools that governments have in their toolbox for sustainable food systems transformations, because it can deliver nutrients to those in need in a sustainable way. We will hear about how different stakeholders can strengthen their commitments at N4G and their investments in this important intervention. Because despite its proven benefits and its high return on investments, large-scale food fortification still faces challenges, including data gaps, regulatory compliance, and in the industry engagement, to name a few. And this webinar will spotlight our progress that we have seen in national and regional efforts. It will talk about private sector innovations, and it will talk about the resources that are available to support stakeholders in making smart commitments for large-scale food fortification at the Nutrition for Growth Summit in Paris. So before we begin with the webinar and with our distinct panel of speakers, I would like to make a few housekeeping reminders. First, your microphone and your camera are off during the webinar. You can use the chat function to introduce yourself and to share general comments. But if you have a question to one of the speakers, please use the Q&A function to ask questions, and be sure to indicate to which speaker your question is for, because at the end of the sessions we will have time to address some questions from the audience. We have live translation available in 60 languages by the AI application Wordly, and in your chat you will find instructions on how to access this app and how you can use the live translation. We will also record this webinar, and the recordings will be made available on the Micronutrient Forum YouTube channel, and we will disseminate where you can find this through our social media channels after the webinar. So without further ado, I would like now to introduce our keynote speaker, and we are very honored to have him here with us today, Sean Baker, who is the Chief Program Officer at Helen Keller International and the Chair of the Board of the Micronutrient Forum and a dear friend. He will share his insights on how food fortification is considered a pillar of food systems transformations, how the Nutrition for Growth Summit in Paris offers an opportunity for renewed and targeted commitments to close existing gaps in food fortification, and he will summarize the key recommendations that were published last year in the Manifesto for Accelerated Actions on Large-Scale Food Fortification. Sean, over to you.
Thank you so much, Saskia, for that kind introduction. And thank you to this fortifying community of partners and individuals who've gathered here to really use the opportunity of the Nutrition for Growth Summit to accelerate action. And thank you for, I see there are over 130 people joining us from across the world. So thank you for everyone for joining us. Before I get into it, I really want to step back. I think it's always useful to remind ourselves of the problem we're solving for. The best estimates of the burden of deficiencies in essential nutrients is that 1.2 billion women of reproductive age and 372 million young children suffer deficiencies in at least one essential nutrient. That's enormous. And to drive home just what that means in terms of human impact, just look at one nutrient that is a common nutrient put into fortification, folate or folic acid or B9, which is essential for the development of the neural tube, so the spinal cord, the spine, and the brain. There's a really critical window of opportunity in the 3rd or 4th week of pregnancy to get things right and make sure there's enough folate for the mom, or things go horribly, horribly wrong. And just how horribly wrong can they go? The best estimates, it's hard sometimes to get a precise handle on the damage that's done, but the best estimates is that every year there are 260,000 neural tube defect affected births per year, and that at least 75% of those children die. And it gets worse than that because we know that many of those children die before they're even born. About 58,000 stillbirths, and then about 60,000 parents are faced with a devastating decision that their fetus has been diagnosed with a terrible defect and they elect to have a pregnancy, an abortion. So just imagine the devastation that the loss of 380,000 lives and the devastation to 380,000 families every year, preventable almost entirely with one single nutrient. And that's just the magic of fortification of one nutrient. And it's also a case study of why, in this case, fortification is really the only answer to truly address that. Because if that nutrient is not in the food system, most women are not going to even know they're pregnant during that period of time. And so doing it through the health system to correct that deficiency is almost impossible. I think, and as Saskia said, we're building on an incredible history of experience and evidence. Fortification has been around for 100 years, starting with fortification of salt with iodine. It is one of the most cost-effective interventions we have in not just all of global public health, but in fact, global development. And there's an enormous base to build from because almost all countries across the world have some experience in large-scale food fortification. And I think as we build up to this Nutrition for Growth Summit, it's a tremendous opportunity to analyze country by country or region. What are the specific gaps right now? What are the levers? And how do we work with decision makers to use the Nutrition for Growth Summit to get across the line some of those priority actions and policies? I summarize it into 3 opportunity gaps and 3 big levers where we need to make progress. So the opportunity gaps, and I really frame it in opportunities, is first closing the performance gap. Almost every country has some form of mandatory fortification standards on the books, but the difference between those standards and performance is often quite large. And I think companies and governments need to commit to working together to meet the current standards in place. That already is going to drive immense progress. Secondly, there is a design gap. Many of these standards go back a long time. There's been change in basic evidence of what are the best vehicles and fortificants, what are the dietary patterns. And so revisiting the current fortification programs to see are there adjustments that can make it of higher impact. Thirdly, is looking at what I would call the food technology innovation gap. I think sometimes we've been quite complacent of the usual nutrient suspects and the usual food vehicle suspects, which leads us to situations where we're not seizing the opportunity of certain vehicles that are already reaching populations that could carry nutrients. A case in point is Ethiopia, where there's a high burden of neural tube defects, but the reach of flour, fortifiable flour, is uneven because so much of it, there's so little centrally processed, and there's an opportunity to add folate to salt. So how can we continue to innovate to mix and match nutrients with food vehicles? And then the 3 levers, I think, are the most important. What I would call making sure we continue to invest in that central nervous system for large-scale food fortification. It is quite a complex operation, calling in the public sector, the private sector, civil society, academics, and research institutions. And we need to make sure that the data and evidence are generated in a way by country that are driving the action needed to take it up. And then the governance and accountability, and how do we bring in voices to make sure that all the actors are playing their part, that it includes, I think, obviously the public sector is important, the private sector is important, but also making citizens' voices such as consumers associations, practitioners, etc., really be strong champions for large-scale food fortification. And then the third is really the enabling environment. I think I get really frustrated that to this day, in most countries, the companies that are standing up and doing the right thing are still paying import duties and value-added taxes on fortification premix and fortification equipment. And that is certainly a commitment that many governments could take to the table to reduce those burdens on the companies that are doing the right thing. My final statement will be that food fortification, I would argue, is more important now than ever, because we know that I started with some very grim numbers, but in fact, if without action, those numbers are likely to get worse. We know that the populations the most at risk of micronutrient malnutrition are vulnerable to shocks. Anytime there's a shock, they have to reduce the consumption of the most nutrient-dense foods and double down on just calories. And so making sure that nutrients are in the food system becomes more important than ever. And there's also, including the climate shock, it's many negative impacts it has. There's growing evidence that the warming world actually reduces the nutrient content of essential crops, calling more than ever to take accelerated action on large-scale food fortification. And with that, I wanted to close with a quote from our co-founder, Helen Keller, which I find particularly appropriate in these times. "We can decide to let our trials crush us, or we can convert them to new forces of good." So I'm just very pleased to be on this webinar today with so many people who are forces of good and really focusing on how do we ensure essential nutrients for moms and kids across the world. Thank you so much, Saskia.
Thank you very, very much, Sean, for this very nice introduction and for reminding us that there are humans behind the statistics of micronutrient deficiencies, and that for them, food fortification can really make a big difference in their lives. I would like to encourage participants to, if they have questions, to address them to post them in the Q&A chat. And we will now move to our first session and our first discussion, which will explore national and regional efforts to advance large-scale food fortification in Africa. And we are really fortunate to have three distinguished speakers joining us for this discussion. The first is Mr. Festo Daudi Capelle, who is a senior trade officer of the Ministry of Industry and Trade, Tanzania. And then we have Mr. Yumusa Mohammed, who's the head of Codex Nutrition and Tobacco Standards Organization in Nigeria. And our third speaker in this first session is Mr. Raymond Chikomba. He's the Senior Nutrition Specialist, Social and Human Development Unit at the Southern African Development Community. I would like to ask the speakers to please put their videos on and their mics on so that we can start the discussion. And each of these speakers will highlight the key fortification programs in the region, the challenges, but also the opportunities in their respective contexts. My first question goes to Festo. Festo, can you put your camera on, please, and your mic on? And can the others also put their cameras on and their mics on? Festo, yes. I would like to ask you if you could share Tanzania's progress, challenges, and how Nutrition for Growth Summit in Paris can really help to sustain the current momentum in large-scale food fortification in Tanzania. Over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. As Madam Speaker introduced me, my name is Festo Capella from the Ministry of Industry and Trade. Yes, Tanzania, like the other countries, used to improve fortification, especially in and egg oil, wheat flour, maize flour, and salt. Yes. Another one. Let's go. Yes. Now, how Tanzania is working to advance food fortification. It is a political will from our leaders, especially from our President, Her Excellency Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, from the President of the United Republic of Tanzania. He used to enter the agreement with the regional commissioners to implement this food fortification, especially for these foods like egg oil, salt, wheat flour, and maize flour. I think you know that Her Excellency also has received the Gates Foundation Goalkeeper Awards for a significant effort in reducing micronutrients, especially in food fortification. This agreement, but the president used to focus on how fortification is implemented, especially in local areas. The regional commission, they are given the indicators, and that indicators they use to report on how they implement. Yes, next slide. Yes, now we have mandatory food fortification. We manage now to have a food fortification regulation, the current one for 2024. This regulation now enforces all industries. At the first time, it was only for large industries. Now we manage to include this small and medium enterprise to engage in food fortification. Now it is mandated now for SMEs, for those who are engaged in food processing. You know, in Tanzania now, most of the foods are served by micro, small, and medium enterprises, about 96%. Also, the availability of technologies, especially for MSMEs engaged in food fortification, that's why we manage them to include in this new food fortification regulation. Another one is the availability of a national multi-sector nutrition action plan, which integrates every stakeholders, role and mandate, and indicated indicators. Yes, yeah, in Tanzania, food and nutrition is managed from the Prime Minister Office. Now we have a national multi-sector nutrition action plan where it put all stakeholders in one cup, and their mandate. And also we have to report to Prime Minister offices. So Prime Minister Office is used to coordinate all nutrition activities concerning also in food fortification. Okay, next. Next slide, please. Yes, these are the foods where it is mandated. This we have salt, we have egg oil, we have maize flour. Yes, and wheat flour. This is the technology that we have in Tanzania now, especially for micro, small, and medium enterprise. We have Sanku technology, and another one is from local manufacturing, from SIDO. This is also, now we managed to use this for micro, small, and medium enterprise for those engaged in food fortification. This also, it is helped by the GAIN used to support local manufacturers to produce these micronutrient dosing machines. Okay, next. Okay, key areas of progress. Yeah, we have a bit of regulatory bodies used to manage all food fortification activities. For example, Tanzania, we have Tanzania Bureau of Standards. The mandate of this bureau is to manage these producers, food processors, to prepare standards. Yes. Now also we have national laboratories used to test fortified food and to analyze. We have from Tanzania Food and Nutrition Center, also from Tanzania Bureau of Standards. Also, key areas of progress now, we have new leaders in Tanzania Food Fortification Alliance. This alliance combines with private sector, government, and NGOs. For now, I'm speaking, I'm the co-chair of Tanzania Food Fortification Alliance. Also, my co-chair is from Thanku, Mr. Guao is from private sectors. Okay, next. Yes, we have also challenges in food fortification. Now, food fortification is well known in central government, nationwide, from the communities, but we have challenges to the coordination up to the local government, from regions up to the districts. They don't know how fortification will be, how fortification can be conducted. That we have one challenge. Another challenge is inadequate compliance from food processors. Most of them are they are conducting the activities in informal ways, so they don't know the process, good manufacturing practice. They don't know how these foods how they can produce their foods in a proper way. That the compliance is very challenging to our country. Weak awareness from food processors, importance of food fortification. Yes, they don't know the importance of food fortification. They always use to produce it for making money, but they don't know the importance of food fortification, especially for adding those micronutrients. Weak awareness from some government officials, yes, especially from local governments. Adequate testing and analyze fortified food of some laboratories. For example, in our national laboratories, some parameters they fail to test. That's why we need them to be capacitated. Weak performance Tanzania food fortification. Yet it is a new leadership. That's why we want to strengthen it. Consumer awareness. Now they don't know, many of consumers of these fortified foods, the importance of consuming these foods. Okay, next slide. Also, we need to improve some areas. Yes, strengthening coordination at all levels, from the central government up to local government, ensuring compliance, strengthen the capacity of food processors. We need them to capacitate, to know specifically how and when, and the importance of food fortification, the regulation and standards to follow to there for this regulation. Also, enhancing monitoring and surveillance, develop a robust monitoring system to track the fortification. Yes, we need to improve this area, monitoring surveillance of fortified foods, to know the status, to track capacity building to regional officers to perform well in food fortification. Yes, we need to capacitate these special officers from the local government to enforce, especially now we have new food fortification regulation. Establish monitoring and evaluation framework, this to monitor fortification levels, coverage, evaluate the impact on public health and the data gathering. Yes, we have challenges of data gathering, especially in these micro, small, and medium enterprises. We are very challenging that. Another one is strengthening national laboratories. Yes, we need to strengthen them, especially in testing. Some lab they have equipment, but the capacity is low. Another have capacity, but the equipment they have no equipment. Also, reagents of testing. We need also to expand fortification to other staple food like rice. Yes, now we started to, from the Bureau of Standards, they started to establish food fortification of rice. Now we start to establish the standards. Okay, next. Yes, thank you. This is the logo to identify fortified food from our country, and this is regulated from Tanzania Food Fortification Regulation. Okay, next.
Thank you
very
so
much.
Yes, thank you so much, Festo. This was very insightful and impressive progress made in Tanzania. So congratulations for that. I would like to move now to the next speaker, Yunusa. Can you please put on your video and your mic? And Yunusa will share about Nigeria's progress in food fortification and especially focus around the enforcement of fortification standards and the use of digital monitoring tools. Over to you, Yunusa.
Good afternoon, all. I hope you can hear me clearly. My name is Yunus Abi Mohammed. I work with Standard Organization of Nigeria as the head Codex Nutrition and Tobacco Division. Please move the next slide. This is just brief about part of my presentation, and I think that's not necessary for me to make a submission for that. However, Standard Organization of Nigeria is a parastatal under the Federal Ministry of Industry, of course, responsible for standardization and quality assurance of products and processes for both imported products into the country and those that are locally manufactured. One basic responsibility which I want to take among all other responsibility here is the responsibility that borders on conformity assessment. Of course, it informs that inspections are carried out, testings are done, and products certified. Move to the next slide so that I don't waste much time on this area. Next slide, please. Now, to inform on the topic of discussion, I want to believe that every country must have a very strong policy as well as regulations to enhance whatever decisions need to be done. Taking into cognizance on this large-scale food fortification, I want to leverage on the national policy on food and nutrition, as well as a standard for fortification and other enabling regulations. The content of, or the summary of these regulations, which are, of course, enabling framework for large-scale food fortification, is to improve nutrition of the target group, reduce micronutrient deficiency, build stronger immune system, and provide access to basic vitamins. Taking into this account, every regulatory agency or anybody that have that oversight function must work within the framework of this national policy. And then, of course, in doing that, we'll upscale improving nutrition issues, food security, and then food safety. Next slide. Understanding the context, which I'm sure the background have been laid. Micronutrient deficiency, particularly in vitamins and mineral deficiency, are significant public interventions. And therefore, Nigeria is not is one of the country affected by this micronutrient deficiency. And as we do know, the deficiency of this micronutrient lead to several health indicators like anemia, impaired cognitive development, and so on and so forth. And therefore, large-scale food fortification is a very cost-effective intervention in ensuring that this micronutrient deficiency is tackled on. And therefore, in implementing the large-scale food fortification, the basic regulatory framework that must be in existence must be very functional. Otherwise, the program itself will not work. Having to understand that you need to work within the framework, you must also exercise monitoring and evaluation of the large-scale food fortification. Otherwise, you will have problem with complying with the fortification standard as well as the policy. Nigeria has instituted a large-scale fortification implemented, and it has been successful. Nigeria started with salt, sugar, wheat flour, vegetable oil to combat these deficiencies in iodine, vitamin A, and iron. Next slide. Now, looking at the progress Nigeria has made in terms of large-scale food fortification, you will agree with me, over 2 decades, over a decade of the journey in food fortification, the large-scale food fortifications had enabled the population, the target population, to enrich their nutritional status in terms of vitamin A, iron, folic acid, and iodine. And of course, this is according to the 2020 evaluation by International Food Policy Research Institute, which indicated that about 80% of target populations are getting fortified food. Of course, you can also see from the fact that including vegetable oil, the three major food vehicles that are fortified, that is the wheat flour, the vegetable oil, and the sugar, have level of increase in terms of their intake, in terms of reaching the target group. So Nigeria has made tremendous progress in terms of making sure that the target groups that require this fortified food get it to tackle the issue of micronutrient deficiency. Next slide. Including, while this implementation is becoming a very success story for Nigeria, Nigeria has also seen the need to expand the reach of the food vehicle. And recently, Nigeria has also embarked in bringing rice as a food vehicle, including bouillon seasoning as a food vehicle for fortification. And the reason behind is that rice is a rich staple food for many Nigerians, and therefore Nigeria underscore the need to use this food vehicle as additional source for enriching the target group. So currently, these two food vehicles are under voluntary fortification because this is a new area, which of course we need to underscore the need to increase capacity in terms of the technical know-how, the equipment that are necessary, and how to upscale it to the entire country. So that is why we are starting on voluntary phases, so that we would have developed a lot of competency in this area. We have also ensured that while we are improving on this, the competency of the regulators, the capacity of the lab that is expected to carry out testing are accredited. Next slide. Training also has come into play because these are very important parameters to ensure that the individuals that are responsible for carrying out the oversight functions in large-scale food fortification from the laboratory, from the inspections, are trained to have the basic knowledge in ensuring that the fortification guidelines have taken. Now, in doing this, because we understand the importance of the large-scale food fortification, Nigeria has welcomed what is called the Digital Fortification Quality Traceability Plus, which of course is a technology that driven system-enhanced regulatory oversight and to ensure that there is transparency and accountability along the value chain. Next slide. While we're improving, there is a need for us to also underscore the reasons why compliance becomes necessary. Without compliance to the requirement of all the regulations, then the fortification will not be a success story. As it were, we have improved our testing capacity. We have improved the necessary testing equipment that are required to ensure that the value that is obtained from laboratory analysis are something to go about with. Our lab is accredited to the requirement of ISO 17025, and therefore this is an issue that have assisted us in ensuring that compliance are met. We have also increased collaboration with private stakeholders, and this have also ensured that we have the influence of the National Food Fortification Alliance, which of course drive the implementation of the large-scale food fortification in Nigeria. This has been a very historic that have helped Nigeria to achieve the fortification. According to survey, we currently have brands representing 5 companies in the ranking index cycle in Nigeria. The publicly listed brand now covers about 80% of flour, milling market, about 88% of the sugar market, and 40% of the edible oil, reaching approximately 134 million individuals. Now, for reasons of this, the digital fortification that we have introduced is expected to ensure an increased compliance level of the vegetable oil. And therefore, this is another area that we're exploiting. The next. Now, innovative food fortification data and knowledge sharing. And of course, this is what DFQT has brought into Digital Fortification Quality Traceability Plus. The Digital Fortification Quality Traceability Plus is a pioneering initiative aimed at establishing supply chain traceability for vitamin A fortification in Nigeria. The project is being led by DINA and of course assisted by TechnoServe. The DFQT dashboard is help government and regulatory agencies to improve regulatory oversight, reduce high functions of inspections, and increase monitoring efficiency by assessing centralized and timely industry data, unlike manual regulatory monitoring mechanism. Currently, among the countries, we have Nigeria, Bangladesh, and India, and Nigeria is doing well at this moment at the level of this DFQT. Next slide. The experience on the DFQT is that we co-design it with the development partners, and therefore is expected and is tailored towards local needs, traceability data on food fortification, track quality from supplier to the end user, and strengthen regulatory oversight, and of course, enhance supply chain transparency. So that's the beauty of the DFQT, because it was co-designed by all the regulators, NAFDAC, FCCPC, and Standard Organization of Nigeria. Next slide. Now, this is a value chain of the preposition that was developed. The preposition for the DFQT is expected that right from the premise producer to the end user, this you can monitor it from the dashboard. Whatever comes from the premise supplier, it's expected that it goes through a chain of receiving, and having received is going to be transformed. And when it transforms, the millers have to analyze to see the content of the amount of vitamin A from the premix itself. Then after transformation, the vegetable oil goes to the market, and of course there is market oversight function from the regulatory agencies to be sure that these samples that have been fortified have carried enough vitamin A. So in that regards, another analysis will happen in the government laboratories. The dashboard, we can see from our own end what the industry is producing. I mean, what the data in the industry is generating. So it makes it easier for compliance purposes. It makes it easier for the regulators to see what is happening and then raise issue. And of course, we do have to do unannounced inspection. Next slide. Now, the challenges that, of course,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but can I ask you to wrap up? Because we have a couple of other speakers. Sorry, thank you.
Just in 2 minutes time. So the challenges that comes with the DFQT is because one is on the pilot test. So gradually there's a lot of observation that we have raised, which time will not permit me, and that's why I'm rushing. But all these observations has been reported back to the developer for them to have a way to improve on the system. Next slide. This is just a sample of HPLC in the lab of SON, and of course we have iCheck. Next slide. This is an environment of the lab, which one of the analysts is conducting analysis. Next slide. The opportunity that is brought by the Nutrition for Growth is just that this discussion will give us a sense of directions of the issues that are on hand, and then what we need to do to upscale on this problem and to develop a more sustaining and everlasting solution to large-scale food fortification. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very impressive, the progress that has been made in Nigeria, and also how you've integrated new digital tools to help to improve the compliance and improve the quality of the large-scale food fortification programs in Nigeria. I would like now to go to the third speaker and the last speaker of this set that will share some national experiences, and that is Mr. Raymond Shikomba, who is the Senior Nutrition Specialist of SADC, but also the chair of the recently launched regional coordination mechanism on large-scale food fortification of Eastern and Southern Africa. Raymond, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Saskia, and thank you for organizing this important meeting, which is bringing together key players and also the innovations that are happening in the field of large-scale food fortification. Can we go to the next slide? So I think my presentation will just try to highlight a brief history of where we are coming from as a region, as SADC, and also how we are collaborating with other regional blocs to coordinate efforts for large-scale food fortification. So I'll give a very brief overview and also look at some of our priorities for the next 5 years, and also some of the commitments that have been agreed by member states and also by the RCM. Next slide. So as you can see from this slide, I'll quickly summarize this content. The East, Central, and Southern Africa Health Community, which is EXA Health Community, has been doing a lot of work in large-scale food fortification, and I think they had a long history of work that they were doing, and I think they are one of the blocks within our region who developed standards early on. And I think as Southern Africa, as SADC, we came in a little bit late, but learned a lot from the experience of EXA, and actually leveraged on the SADC Food and Nutrition Security Strategy 2025 and 2015 to 2025. And also came up with our own regional standards in 2020 as SADC, which were endorsed by ministers in 2020. And also in 2021, ministers then urged the Secretariat in collaboration with other partners to roll out these standards within the countries. Next slide. So I think the next slide just also highlights the kind of coordination mechanisms that were put in place both in SADC and also in EXA, where SADC had a platform established in 2018, which was just bringing together all the players who were in the food fortification arena and trying to see how they can work with countries to ensure that countries have standards, have regulations, and also are supported in their fortification programs. Also, on the East African side, there was more focus on universal salt iodization, and I think with support from IGN and other partners, we saw that there was a very strong coordination and engagement with countries in this this iodine platform, which was also very key in the coordination of the regional efforts. Next slide. So because of this more like a complementarity of efforts between these two blocks, there was a decision to say, why can't we come together and just create one block or one RCM for East and Southern Africa, which will just cover food fortification and universal salt iodization. So there was a consultation meeting done in 2023 where about 8 member states also participated, where we tried to agree on the priorities and the need for this RCM. And I think there was consensus, and we actually came up with terms of reference, which then guided the establishment of the RCM. And I can happily say that in 2024 we managed to bring together all our membership and also the member states to Kenya, Mombasa, where we actually had our initial consultation meeting, which was a great success. And we managed to share experiences and learn from what countries are doing. Next slide. So this really gave us a lot of momentum to actually see more can be done through the RCM. So we might ask, why the RCM? Why do we need the regional coordination mechanisms? The RCM is trying to respond to the weak technical capacity at country level. These issues came out of the feasibility study, which was conducted last year, and it's more like the baseline of where we are starting from in this journey of 5 years for the first roadmap that we have created. So there was that weak capacity at country level, and also the coordination and technical support plus planning for fortification was seen to be still very poor, I think, in most countries. And I think, as has been highlighted earlier, there's poor infrastructure and also lack of awareness. And I think these points have already been highlighted before. Next slide. So the vision of the RCM really is to have a thriving East and Southern Africa where member state populations have access to safe, nutritious, and fortified food, leading to healthy communities and a future free of the burden of micronutrient deficiencies. And the goal is to decrease the prevalence of micronutrient deficiencies in East and Southern Africa through effective implementation of food fortification and universal salt iodization programs. And the period there from 2025 to 2030 is just linked to our roadmap. Next slide. So you can move to the next one. Thank you. So these are some of the key objectives of the RCM to harmonize standards and regulations across the regions. And I think I've highlighted that as SADC, we do have those standards, and EAC actually has standards which they are now at a position where they are even enforcing those standards, and member states are actually, supposed to act on those standards. And I think they've actually seen an improvement in trade and movement of foods, which is fortified. And I think from the Southern African side, I think it's an area that we're still trying to also strengthen on how we can then actually enforce the standards for member states. Currently, we are just urging countries, and I think it's a journey that we are moving very well, and we hope very soon we're also going to be in a position to enforce. And also just to increase the adoption of these standards by member states. It's not an easy process from what we are observing. There are always these back and forth activities that are needed within country to ensure that maybe the bureaucracy and the systems within the countries can actually be in a position to adopt these standards. So yeah, I can also highlight the issue of resources. I think it's a key issue which would need the RCM to support countries in also mobilizing resources and bringing together all the key partners so that they can actually, come together and support a particular country, but also try to limit any duplication that can actually be happening. And I would also want to speak on number 6, where we are seeing that in countries there are these fortification alliances, but they are not very effective. And I think it's a key role that was observed, that there's need to build a capacity of national coordination alliances or platforms, so that there can be that very close communication between the government, the private sector, as well as the regulators and standards sectors as well. Can we move to the next slide? And I think also the issue of data, I think it was a key issue that was highlighted, and we are happy to say that we have a partner who are very strong in this area of data, who are actually joining the RCM in 2025. And we hope that working together with such partners, we can actually be able to produce a report every year, which can actually show the situation of what is happening in the East and Southern African region, but also, we can be able to really track whether we are moving towards where we need to be. This is just the summary of the membership and regs that are currently covered within this RCM. We have BAC, IGAD, and SADC, and also we have the health blocks, EXA Health Community. We also have 22 countries currently covered, and that whole list of partners who are also part of this. And currently, SADC and EXA are the co-chairs. Next slide. I think I'm already coming to the end. I think the next one. Thank you. So I think maybe some of the priorities I was speaking to them as I was going, but I think it's just to support countries to adopt mandatory food fortification, and also just to strengthen the regulatory and monitoring aspects. Next slide. So I think many challenges have been highlighted, and I think member states during the last consultation meeting highlighted the need for the RCM to really have a plan or a roadmap that can be tracked. And also, there's clear channels of support for countries. And I believe that the RCM will actually be in a position to really engage more with countries in 2025 and see how best such support can be channeled. Thank you, Saskia, over to you. And these are just the contacts, maybe if you would want to reach out to any of the colleagues in the RCM. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raymond, and thank you for illustrating the importance of regional collaboration and what it can bring to the scale up of large-scale food fortification. I want to thank all three speakers for sharing the impressive experiences in countries on large-scale food fortification, but also to be very frank about the challenges and the barriers that are still being faced in order for large-scale food fortification to be scaled up and to reach those most in need. An important player in this space is obviously the private sector. So in our next panel, we will focus on the role of the private sector in driving the delivery and the scale-up of large-scale food fortification in Africa. And joining us for this discussion are Rizwan Yousufali, who is the Program Director of Millers for Nutrition in TechnoServe, Felix Brooks Church, the co-founder and CEO of Sanku, that is a social impact company in Africa, and Paloma Fernandez, who is the CEO of the Cereal Millers Association in Kenya. So they will share their insights on expanding fortification efforts across Africa and overcoming industry bottlenecks and strengthening business incentives for food fortification. Riz, Felix, and Paloma, over to you. I will not introduce you individually, so please take the floor and follow each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Saskia. Does it mean that we go in the same order, I suppose, right?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and thank you to the organizers for allowing us to share our few thoughts on this issue of food fortification. I will try and share a few thoughts on as we look at the N4G coming up and looking for different stakeholders to make that commitment, to highlight the importance and the role of the private sector, particularly food processors. So next slide, please. And first of all, I think my colleagues and speakers before me have made a very strong case of why food fortification. But as we pivot, we have to recognize the role of the food processors in actually producing this food and distributing it and getting it to people. And they play an ultimate role in large-scale food fortification, or any fortification for that matter. And the N4G summit is perhaps an opportunity for us to build and confirm the commitment of governments, of donors, of development partners, to create an environment where then the private sector is able to make its commitments to food fortification. We have to appreciate also the role that they have, and they already do reach millions or billions of consumers on a daily basis around the world. And when we take stock of what the success has been so far, is the private sector is committed in many respects. There's millions of tons of food that is already fortified. We frequently celebrate in this community the success of salt iodization programs in eliminating virtually goiter or cretinism and making such huge strides in reducing iodine deficiency disorders. But yet we find ourselves in a case where the processors of this are hardly ever appreciated and frequently even critiqued. So this is an opportunity for us to change that and understand the challenges and limitations that the private sector faces and what kind of commitments are needed at the N4G summit coming up that would enable them to overcome some of these barriers. And because there are limited incentives, and despite this, food is getting fortified. There are high compliance costs. Despite that, quite a lot of food is getting fortified. And there's, in many cases, policies exist and standards exist on food fortification, but it's weak or skewed enforcement is, and as Sean put it before me in his opening comments, that when you look at the companies that do fortify, it is really a call to say, how can we make that easier? Yes, there is still a lot to be done on expanding the commitment of the private sector to do more because they have the means to do more and they have the reach to people to do more. So I'll just reemphasize that the N4G coming up needs to make some stronger commitments to make sure that we are leveraging the impact of the private sector. Next slide, please. And so I'll introduce, many of you may have heard about Millers for Nutrition, which is trying to build this coalition of not only private sector millers, but everybody that surrounds them, development partners, ecosystem partners, government agencies, to bring them together to say this is something where a collective effort is needed. So Millers for Nutrition is a coalition of fortification stakeholders, all of us that are interested and are convinced about the value of food fortification. And in addition to improving the nutritional value of staple foods, the support is also, the Millers for Nutrition support is also looking to drive business value. We frequently try and make the business case for food fortification that is primarily up to now focused on the public health benefit. But there's also the private sector benefit of this, and that needs to be explored and developed more. And essentially, Millers for Nutrition is trying to make fortification excellence easier for millers by building their capacity and more rewarding. It's a growing network of partners that are coming together to support that. And next slide. So I'll just go back because this webinar series is a build-up to the N4G summit. And essentially, there are some specific asks that we can think of that stakeholders need to make to enable this increased private sector commitment to large-scale food fortification and encourage that expansion of that. So to governments, we're looking at through commitments around a mandate to enforce fortification and create a more level playing field. Sean mentioned the issue of providing incentives for those that are doing a good job and subsidies and waivers. But sometimes it's not only limited to just tax breaks, but there are also other transactional costs that the industry faces that governments can do a little bit more on in bringing in policy that is favorable for the private sector to do the good that they have the potential to do. We obviously need to integrate. Other incentives could be integrating fortified foods into public procurement systems and invest in local quality infrastructure. I was very pleased to see the progress that some countries are already making. A colleague from Nigeria talked about what the countries are already doing in building that infrastructure. To public sector and development partners, we need to obviously strengthen our industry engagement, fund and adopt new tools that are available to us, and also create schemes that support and recognize where there is good performance. And there's a lot more we can do around harmonizing standards. It's again making it easier. We can de-risk private sector investment, expand funding opportunities. So many things we can do. And essentially, I'll end my few cents here with an overall call to action. So the N4G is coming up, and stakeholders must commit to creating the right policy, financing, and market-based interventions that make fortification a viable and attractive and impactful business decision for private sector millers. We have made a very strong case about the return on investment on food fortification that has such tremendous public health value. We need to be doing more to say that that value is also shared with, from a business point, by the people that produce and distribute these food products. So thank you very much, Saskia. I'll end here.
Thank you, Riz. Over to you, Felix.
Great. Good day, everyone. My name is Felix Brooks Church. I'm calling in from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sanku. We are a social enterprise, which means we sit somewhere in between the NGO world and the for-profit commercial private sector world. We're very driven on sustainability, so there is that enterprise company mindset, but also impact, and that's where the social part comes in. We're currently working in Tanzania, Kenya, and just recently launched Ethiopia. But over the coming years, we look to work throughout East Africa and beyond. And what we're working on is food fortification, but we're looking to expand the definition of what is fortifiable, more specifically around small-scale fortification, rural fortification. This has often, unfortunately, been overlooked, which is arguably irresponsible when talking about large-scale or nationwide fortification. And to use an example from Festo earlier, in Tanzania, 96% of the population is consuming from these small mills. So if we're truly designing large national fortification programming, we need to guarantee that all the food that's being consumed is fortified. And that's why we're so passionate about small-scale fortification. And a great example of that is here, a mother in East Africa. She's cooking this and their children are eating this every day. It's a porridge made of maize flour, but that's not being produced at the large industrial central big companies because they don't either exist or have the reach. She's buying that locally and it's milled locally. This is a small scale mill. Every village might have one, every town a dozen, every city a couple hundred. But collectively in these countries, these mills, the thousands of them, feed entire nations. So if we're truly going to reach pure, large scale saturation and impact, we need a solution for these, and that's what Sanku focuses on. So just so you know what a small scale mill is a very simple process. Raw grains added into the mill, it's milled into flour and literally sold there right on the street to mothers. So for us, it was an aha moment. If we built a machine and a mechanism and a business model to fortify at this point, we're going to reach a lot of people and arguably the most at-risk people. So we invented this machine. It's called the Sanku dosifier. It's a microfeeder. It doses. It straps on seamlessly to all of these small mills. Again, there's thousands of them, tens of thousands of them throughout East Africa. And it does a very accurate job of adding a precise, safe, concentrated amount of nutrient premix into that flour. So that miller now is fortifying their flour. It removes human error because it automatically starts and stops. And it's a very accurate process. It's also, well, here's a demonstration. The raw grain is added. There's load sensors that weighs that grain, determining the weight. In the front is what's called a dispenser, which holds those concentrated nutrients. As that grain flows out of the dosifier and into the mill, it's calculated and a precise automated amount of premix is added correctly every single time. Again, removing human error, ensuring we meet the standard and ultimately have impact. And we know we're having impact in how the machines are working because each of the machines has a SIM card speaking to the nearest network. So in real time on my phone right now, I can tell you how much a mill in the tiniest corner of, say, Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, is how much flour they're producing, how much nutrients they're adding. Is it within the standard? Are they being compliant? If the machine is broken or overheating, we can automate our staff to go out there. We have over 100 staff, 30 vehicles. We can fix machines within hours, guaranteeing a miller always has the accurate tool to do an accurate job. So we've digitized fortification in dashboards and really streamlined our operations. We've also built a factory to produce flour bags, a key input for these millers. And the reason is these small millers have very small margins. They can't afford the nutrients. So we sell them the flour bags, which we're able to produce cheaper. Those savings offset entirely the cost of the premix for these small millers. We've neutralized the cost. It's essentially free, but sustainable because it is being paid for. The biggest outcome is now this miller, and this is a visual representation, is selling premium fortified flour in the marketplace at the same price point as inferior unfortified flour, meaning we don't have to increase the price, change millions of behaviors of the consumers, of mothers, or force them into decisions like, do I eat healthy or send my daughter to school? Remember, these are many people living on less than $1 a day. So that's the business model that supports the technology, supports scale. We're reaching over 1,400 mills throughout East Africa, 10 million people every single day. What we also recognize is the quality of premix is poor in East Africa. There's a lot of counterfeit premix. We just launched a few months ago, about 6 months ago, the first East African premix blending factory. And it's trying to accomplish and already accomplished 40% savings on premix. It also, which relates to, incentivizing millers, not only small, medium, but large millers as well. We now have premix on the front doors of all these mills, so they don't have to have 4, 5, 6 months of working capital wrapped up on a container from Europe or Asia. They can order in the morning, delivered in the afternoon. Much lower minimum quantities as well. I'm in Addis today because we just signed an MOU with the government of Ethiopia, the Ministry of Industry, and I'm excited that I can finally publicly announce that we're actually going to build our second premix factory here in Ethiopia. This one that you see here is in Tanzania. We're launching that very soon, and hopefully by the end of the year, we're also producing premix in Ethiopia, incentivizing millers by having it in country, in local currency, and a lot cheaper and guaranteed quality because we're a social enterprise. So our mission is to guarantee that every meal, whether it's from a small mill, medium mill, large mill, is quality, is fortified, saves lives, and guarantees the basic human right for families just like this. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix. Very impressive. And I did note your slogan on the wall that access to nutritious foods is a basic human right, which I saw in one of your pictures. So thank you for sharing your experiences. The final speaker in this block is Paloma Fernandez. Paloma, over to you.
Thank you very much, Saskia. My name is Paloma Fernandez, and I am the CEO of the Cereal Millers Association in Kenya. Next slide, please. So the Cereal Millers Association plays a very vital role in the food industry in Kenya. We're at the forefront of food security, food safety, and nutrition in the country. We represent the interests of wheat millers, maize millers, rice, and also some other cereal millers. And really our focus at the Cereal Millers Association is to provide safe, affordable, and nutritious food to over 40 million of our consumers in Kenya. Our membership right now comprises of about 55 milling and trading companies who are spread across the country. In time, we hope to create a regional East African association. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that exist for associations. And I'll start off with the opportunities because I'm an optimist. And I think we can harness our power for better nutrition. As millers, we hold a unique position of influence and power as an association of millers. Why? Because we understand our consumers. And actually, we possess those really strong brands that can influence their nutritional choices. So our reach is critical in making these decisions for them. We can empower associations through self-regulation. So for example, as an association, the CMA is capitalizing on the self-regulation initiative, such as the Kenya Millers Fortification Index, the KMFI. And what this does for us as an association is actually to help us increase our credibility and also demonstrate this whole commitment to excellence in fortification. Also, our voice, as an association, our voice needs to be heard. And it's heard better as an association than as an individual miller. So what we do is we actually engage a lot with regulatory authorities. We, engage with key government sectors, and we discuss matters nutrition. For us, that feedback should ideally shape better fortification policies together, and hopefully it's meant to drive meaningful change through our collective action. Next slide. In terms of challenges, we do have a few challenges, and they've been mentioned by all the speakers. But I'd like to differentiate it in terms of challenges for millers and for the association. So for a miller, the higher cost of making fortified products less competitive, and we've heard that. And especially so in the base of the pyramid, the BOP markets, who actually opt for cheaper and non-fortified alternatives. For the association, this low adoption of fortification makes it very hard for us to justify and sustain fortification initiatives. In terms of lack of incentive, for some millers, fortification can be seen as a weak business case, and this discourages investment in compliance. This lack of, and to add to this, the lack of consumer awareness and the demand further reduces that motivation. For us as an industry, as an association, that industry fatigue, non-compliance, lack of consumer awareness weaken our efforts to really promote fortification, and sometimes the overall participation declined. One of the bigger ones we have is really unbalanced regulations. For millers, this uneven enforcement of regulation, which allows non-compliant millers to thrive and gain market share, really is unfair for us. And as an association, this is a tough one because sometimes following the rules hurts. While association members follow the rules, the non-compliant players undercut prices. And what they do is they're actually capturing a larger market share every day. For us, it makes it harder to rally members around fortification efforts when sometimes compliance feels more like a disadvantage than a benefit. Next slide. So what can we do differently? What are the expansion strategies that we can achieve a wider coverage of existing food vehicles where LSFF has been difficult? And one of the things I would say is, let us leverage associations for broader impact. I think we need to start thinking differently, and maybe we need to collaborate through associations rather than relying solely on individual millers. And it's just obvious that by reaching a larger number of millers, it will significantly accelerate expansion of food fortification efforts without that so much work being done. So we really might need to build their capacity, but that might be the way to go. We've talked about it. I've heard a lot about it. It is important to recognize and reward compliance. So in regions such as Kenya, where fortification is mandatory, it's crucial to identify and celebrate the most compliant food companies. By acknowledging these companies, what do? We build their brand, we increase their sales, and we actually set a benchmark for compliance. And for us, this would ultimately lead to wider adoption of fortification. We need to engage in global initiatives, and we've seen the Millers for Nutrition initiative, which CMA has been a founder member of, where we aim to reach 3 billion consumers globally with nutritious food. One of the most interesting ones, and I think that we're learning about, is we constantly need to be innovating on last mile distribution. We need to work on distribution strategies to actually ensure that our nutritious food is accessible to at-risk populations. And in order to do this, for example, we have partnered with TechnoServe on a market linkage initiative to actually work on enhancing the base of the pyramid markets. And finally, my last one is to enhance data collection. We need data. It is as simple as that to nudge us in the right direction. Thank you, Saskia.
Thank you so much, Paloma, and thank you to all three speakers for really eloquently illustrating what the private sector is already doing and what the private sector could do more if some challenges are being tackled. And I do think that in all the presentations today so far, we've heard about opportunities for tangible investments and commitments that can be made at the upcoming Nutrition for Growth Summit. So in our last section of today's webinar, we have two speakers who are going to talk about the tools and the resources that are available to support stakeholders that want to make a smart commitment in LSFF in Africa. And the first speaker is Kristen Sandel, who is the Senior Advocacy Specialist of Large-Scale Food Fortification at the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. And our second speaker is Jessie Ganaway, who is the Communications Director for Food Fortification Initiative. So they will introduce these key resources, such as the Large-Scale Food Fortification Commitment Guide, and provide guidance on how to use this guide. And I want to hand over to them. I know we are running a little bit out of time, so we have to shorten the Q&A session. But I think it's important that that you all hear and learn about the resources that you have access to in order to make your commitments. So, Kristen, over to you.
And I'll also, I'll jump in.
I was just going to say Jessie's going first.
Yes. Thank you for the introduction, Saskia.
Okay.
I'm pleased to join you all with my colleague Kristen to share resources that can support you as you advocate for large-scale food fortification and build a commitment for N4G. Next slide, please. In 2021, N4G Tokyo included new nutrition commitments that led to billions of dollars in financing for making those commitments happen. However, there were only a few commitments that included fortification, and many of these were quite broad. We see N4G as a powerful tool to advance fortification at the national, regional, and global levels, as has been mentioned earlier in this webinar. And we want to make sure you have access to tools to make that happen. So first, I wanted to point you to two key advocacy resources that will help you build your commitments. The first on the screen is a fortification-specific guide for crafting commitments for N4G, developed by the Global Fortification Technical Advocacy Working Group. This guide was created for national and regional policymakers, businesses, donors, civil society groups, N4G country coordinators, researchers, and other allied supporters of micronutrient nutrition. In the guide, you'll find background on N4G Paris and fortification, instructions on how to make a commitment, areas of focus for N4G fortification commitments, stakeholder-specific examples of SMART pledges, and additional resources. This guide is intended to complement the second resource on the screen, the official N4G Paris Engagement or Commitment Guide, which includes more information on how to create and submit commitments beyond fortification. We've put links to both guides in the chat. Next slide. So how do you actually go about building specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound or SMART commitments? Here's an example on the screen for governments from the Fortification Commitment Guide. This commitment seeks to strengthen an existing fortification program by collecting data on the compliance and coverage of fortified foods. As you can see, the commitment gets really specific on how they will achieve this goal, including specifying the activities and the timeline. It specifies the dates of commitment and how often the country will report on related indicators. This is one feature that commitments must have as part of N4G. They must be able to be monitored and to have that progress reported through public tracking mechanisms. But this is just one example for one type of stakeholder. Fortification commitments as part of N4G can also come from businesses, donors, and others. They can also be more expansive than this one commitment and include several other types of themes in your commitment. They can be programmatic, policy-based, or financial, supporting progress toward national and regional nutrition goals and targets. They can strengthen or build upon existing fortification programs and policies, enabling these programs to reach more people with higher quality staple foods. And/or they can revise and update existing fortification policies, bringing them in line with current data regarding food consumption and micronutrient deficiency. We've included a link in the chat if you'd like to learn more about how to ensure your commitments are smart. If applicable, we recommend that commitments build on past N4G Tokyo commitments. Commitments should also align with national nutrition plans and integrate nutrition within different sectoral plans and investments in the country. I mentioned earlier how important it is that your commitment is monitored and progress is reported on. To do this, commitments should be budgeted for and financed and ensure that the accountability process is explained to duty bearers. Registering your commitment in publicly available nutrition accountability framework platform, the NAF platform, and reporting progress annually is one way to help hold accountability for these commitments, and it's also required if you want your commitment included in N4G. Kristen will get a little bit more into some other accountability mechanisms to register and track your commitments. Next slide. Okay, so now we know a bit on how to craft the language for the commitment, but how do we actually go about making it and registering that commitment? So when you're preparing to make a commitment in a specific country, collaboration is very important. Before starting, we recommend engaging with your national N4G focal point. So who is that person? Well, in countries that are part of the Scaling Up Nutrition or SUN movement, the N4G focal point is often the SUN government focal point. You can visit SUN's website to see a list of SUN countries. If you're unsure if your who your country's N4G focal point is, or if your country is not part of the SUN movement, you can contact the Paris N4G mailbox, which we've put in the chat. The national N4G focal point will coordinate, collate, and submit N4G commitments ahead of the summit. As I mentioned before, commitments to be counted toward N4G Paris, they must be registered online in the Nutrition Accountability Framework platform. You can also view previous commitments from N4G and other events on the same platform in the commitment tracker. And the link for this is in the chat. So lastly, what's the timeline for making commitments? Commitments registered in the Nutrition Accountability Framework before February 28th, so just next week is coming up, will likely be verified in time for the summit. Any commitments registered by March 28th, so the end of the summit, may be considered for inclusion in the N4G Paris Compact Annex, which is a publication that summarizes and lists the commitments that stakeholders make. You can check out the previous summits from Tokyo, that Compact Annex on the N4G website. And if you need a little bit more time, commitments registered in the accountability framework after the summit until June 2025 will be counted toward N4G Paris. Next slide. I'll now turn it over to Kristen to connect N4G commitments with broader advocacy opportunities that can help advance fortification.
Thanks, Jessie. So to set N4G in a wider context of global and national advocacy, I'd first point to the World Health Assembly resolution on large-scale food fortification. So this resolution was passed by the World Health Assembly 2 years ago. The World Health Assembly is the decision-making body of the World Health Organization, and it's composed of delegations from all 194 WHO member states. It's responsible for setting the World Health Organization's policies and also for making key public health decisions and recommendations. So the resolution that was passed 2 years ago calls for progress reports every 2 years, beginning next year in 2026 and running through 2030, which means that food fortification will be on the agenda of the World Health Assembly during that time, and member states will have the opportunity to share what they're doing to advance food fortification in their countries and regions. So I think you can see that this really dovetails nicely with Nutrition for Growth and commitments that are going to be made there on large-scale food fortification. They are then building momentum towards reporting and progress, where food fortification will be featured prominently on the agenda at the World Health Assembly. We think that N4G really plays a critical role in translating the World Health Assembly resolution on food fortification into real-world impact by securing smart commitments, driving investment, and strengthening accountability. And this means more donor and government funding for large-scale food fortification. It means more private sector investment in fortification technology and compliance. It means regulatory reforms and enforcement mechanisms that improve fortification coverage and ensure a level playing field for the private sector. So the point here is that Nutrition for Growth commitments to food fortification have significance beyond the member state or the stakeholder making the commitment, but they also contribute to global and regional momentum to strengthening and scaling up food fortification, and ultimately to significantly reducing micronutrient deficiencies globally. So by making and supporting Nutrition for Growth commitments, we're all part of this wider effort as well. So just to quickly walk you through a few key resources that are available to support you in this work. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. So the first I'll highlight is the Large-Scale Food Fortification Advocacy Toolkit. You can find this at futurefortified.org. The toolkit includes advocacy resources, including policy briefs, the N4G Food Fortification Commitment Guide that Jesse just mentioned, and a guide for communicating effectively on large-scale food fortification to the media and to duty bearers. The toolkit is currently focused on Nutrition for Growth and on the World Health Assembly resolution, but it will be continually updated with new resources and new advocacy opportunities. So you can take a look at it now and also continue to visit it in the months to come for updated information on fortification advocacy. Next slide, please. The next resource is the Future Fortified mailing list. This is a listserv that currently shares regularly information about upcoming events and webinars, but it will also be part of a new communications initiative that is kicking off this year to share the latest research and resources and learning from large-scale food fortification programs all around the world. So encourage you to check that out and to subscribe to that listserv if you haven't done so already. Next slide, please. So finally, I would just highlight the Global Fortification Data Exchange, or GFDX. GFDX is a great source of detailed information on national food fortification programs and on food fortification globally, including data visualizations that you can play around with and use. GFDX collects its data through biannual surveys, where governments and implementers, UN agencies, donors, academia, and industry are invited to share their data on food fortification from their own context. So there is a data survey that is actually just about to launch in the second quarter of 2025. And so I just, you can reach out to the email address that's currently in the chat to contribute to the 2025 survey, which is just about to be launched. So this is a resource that's really dependent on contributions from the whole fortification community. So really encourage you to check that out and to see how you can contribute data from where you sit to this wider global database. So with that, I will, and we don't have much time for questions, unfortunately, but look forward to working with you all and supporting you all in any way we can to in the lead up to Nutrition for Growth. And over to you, Saskia.
Yes, thank you very much, Jessie and Kristen, for summarizing the resources that are available. And I do realize that we really have very little time, if none, for Q&A, but I did notice that there has been very lively interactions already ongoing in the Q&A chat, and that questions have been addressed, and that also even contact details have been exchanged. So I think this webinar and the discussion really served a purpose, and I would encourage you also to continue to contact one of us or one of the speakers if you have further questions, and particularly in the lead up for Nutrition for Growth. There's one question that I would like to ask to the first two speakers, because I do realize that I did cut them short. And the first one is to Festo, which was a question specifically on the role of small and medium enterprises and what you are doing in Tanzania to also include small and medium enterprises in these efforts. Festo, over to you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, we did include now micro, small, and medium enterprise and food fortification, because now we have technology, especially in maize flours. As Felix presented, the technology of Sanku. Now we have, yes, from SIDOM, we are assured that now the presence of premise, yes, we are assured, and the technology. We include them because most of the foods served in Tanzania are coming from micro, small, and medium enterprise. Yet another is from large scale, but it is in a low quantity. It used to save most of people from towns and urban areas. But the micro, small, and medium used to save the majority, especially from interiors. Yes, we include them to ensure that all foods are fortified. Thank you.
Thank you, Festo. And then a question, the last question to you, Nusa, because I did cut you short, and I apologize for that. But I would like to know from you, looking at Nutrition for Growth and looking at the opportunities that are there for donors and for countries and other stakeholders to make commitments, what would be your number one request to them in the space of large-scale food fortification? What do you think is the most critical barrier that needs more investments? Nusa, over to you.
All right, thank you very much. This is an interesting area, which I want to believe that one very essential component that I believe is necessary for sustaining the large-scale food fortification is the strong collaboration that must exist, the commitment between the development partners, the stakeholders, and everybody in the value chain of food fortification. Without this commitment, there is no way even the development partners will be able to support. So it's holistically that it must be looked in that context, that there must be strong commitment and a strong collaboration to see that large-scale food fortification is a cost-effective way of addressing micronutrient. Without that commitment, everything we continue to do, without collaborations, everything we continue to do will not have a positive impact at the end of the day. Because once you do a cost assessment impact, you rather see that there is a failure in that aspect. So there must be a way to harness that strong bond, that collaboration between all stakeholders. That's the only best way to approach this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And those are very encouraging words. So with that, I would like to close this webinar. I would like to let everyone know that we have the recordings of the webinar that will be posted on our social media channel. Hopefully by the end of this week or within a few days, we will let you know. And I would also like to let you know that the organizers of this webinar will also organize a side event at the Nutrition for Growth Summit Week on March 24. And these side events will be broadcasted on a YouTube channel, and we will also inform you more on the exact date and time of the side event that will highlight and celebrate progress in large-scale food fortification, as well as new commitments in large-scale food fortification. So please stay tuned, and we will let you know very soon when that when and where that side event will happen, and how you can access and how you can follow that online. Thank you very much for the lively discussions. I wish you a very nice day, and I see you hopefully next month in Paris. Over to you. Bye.